to okay yes, and I'm honored to welcome you to the third of the new histories across the Indo-Pakistan border, new histories of media across the Indo-Pakistan border, which is sponsored by the South Asia Institute. A special thanks to Bill and to Kathy for helping us organize the event and for chairing the South Asia Institute, directing the South Asia Institute. It is my pleasure to welcome Salma Siddique to our third talk, and she is a media studies scholar and the principal investigator of a DFG-funded film exploitatorship project titled Nitrate Cities at Humboldt University. She completed her PhD at the University of Westminster in London on the impact of partition on film traffic and genres produced in Bombay and Lahore, which is now out, congratulations, from as titled Evacuee Cinema, Bombay and Lahore in Partition Transit from Cambridge University, published in 2022. And this is from which she'll be drawing her talk today. Her work has also been published in the journals of Comparative Studies of South Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, Social Text, Feminist Media Histories, Third Test, and Bioscope. And she is a co-editor of Bioscope South Asian Screen Studies. Thank you, Salma, and welcome.
Thank you, Isabel. Thanks a lot for inviting me. And thanks also to you for helping us both navigate a book writing sort of journey during the pandemic. So there are many sort of thanks that are due to you at this time. Okay, so today, before I begin my talk, I just quickly would like to introduce the book. It's called Evacuee Cinema, as Isabel earlier mentioned. Isabel, can we have a look at the first slide, please? Thank you. And it emerged from my PhD thesis, which was examining the impact of partition on Hindi-Urdu filmmaking in the subcontinent, and basically the relationship between Indian and Pakistani cinema. So how did these two national cinemas come into existence? And I'll share a quick look of the table of contents, which is just right there. Yeah. Just another click there, one more so that we can have a, yeah. So today I'll be talking about the first, taking portions from the first chapter, which is the All India Ambitions of Lahore. But as you can see, the book has two parts beyond the introduction, which is the first part is the secular stance of Bombay. And within that, I'm looking at three enunciations. One is a popular film magazine, which many of you are familiar with, Film India, but I'm also looking at memoirs by migrant filmmakers who went from Bombay to Lahore. So these are in Urdu. So Film India is an English language source, then the memoirs are in Urdu. And then the third chapter is looking at theatrical performances of this time by a film actor. So these are not films per se, but these are plays that were being performed by Prithviraj Kapoor and his troupe. And the central argument of this part is that the much touted secular stance of the Bombay film industry, everybody has been talking about how if there is this kind of one space or has been historically one space in India that has been somewhat blind to one's identities, it's the Bombay filmmaking. And I do not negate this view, but I try to understand how does this come into place. And I think that partition is quite central to it. And this secular stance is built, I would argue, on the belligerence to the idea of Pakistan. So this is the larger argument of this section. Then part two is following filmmakers, actors, artists, who are moving between Bombay and Pakistan at this time in the 1940s and 50s. So part two is between Bombay and Pakistan, Pakistan as an abstraction, less of a territorial space, but more as an idea, right? So, and there we have three chapters. There's a partition wish, which deals with filmmaking brothers, Fazli brothers, who are making what are known at this time and also later on the Muslim social films, right? So I'm making this connection between the demand for Pakistan, the desire for Muslim independence, and the appearance of this genre at this time, right? The fifth chapter is titled Partition Romance, and it's looking at these romantic comedies that are being made by a refugee team that is making films in Bombay after partition. And the last chapter is looking at this category of films called charbas or duplicates in Pakistan and their relationship to their Indian originals, so to speak, right? So, but it does that through the figure of a child star called Ratan Kumar. So basically this section is looking at artists and filmmakers and actors moving between these two spaces and how their personas and their practice changes with this movement. So that's the overall structure of the book. We can go back to the first page. Thanks, Isabel. Now, a quick note about the use of the term evacuee here. I've been asked many questions, so I thought I would begin with sort of clarifying or sort of sharing why Evacuee Cinema. So my proposed term, Evacuee Cinema, is a reflection of exilic cinema, and it's based on the historical specificity of partition, involving the two-way migration and impasses of ownership. Central to the conception of this book are the trajectories of departing and arriving film personnel in Bombay and Lahore. In the process, the book also encapsulates the continuities and disruptions in terms of the pre-nation state All India film, which bequeathed post-colonial, nationally distinct cinemas in South Asia. Yet the term Evacuee Cinema is not merely descriptive. It also declares a method whereby I have sought to extend a bureaucratic category used to manage land and property proprietorship by both nation states into a conceptual frame to characterize cultural production. Evacuee Cinema seeks to convey the discordant, chaotic, and transformative force of partition by identifying the evacuation, rehabilitation, and voiding that went into the making of nationally separate cinemas. Evacuee Cinema is thus neither solely Indian nor solely Pakistani, but delves into interstitial and transitionary filmmaking during the long partition, which was anticipating and accommodating new national orders. Similar to the bureaucratic category of evacuee property, Evacuee Cinema is a story of dislodgement involving two sides. And now we can move to, yes, the second section, Punjab on the film map of India, which is what I'm going to talk about today. So there haven't been too many studies that look at the relationship between Bombay and Lahore, but by the time I was beginning this book, or the research really, most of the research, existing work on colonial film cities in India was looking at these two cities, or was suggesting that there was a sort of a partnership between the two cities, the two colonial cities, in terms of filmmaking. And there are books like this work by Kaushik Bhaumik, there's also Eric Barnow's book. The idea was that these two cities were always approached through the vantage point of Bombay's sponge-like emergence of a trans-regional film center. What I'm trying to do here is actually talk about the brief revival that Lahore had in the 1940s. So there, I mean, it has been conceded that the city had a brief revival in 1940s. But what I'm trying to do here is to look at this brief revival, but through a readjusted view from Lahore. So we're looking not through Bombay, but we're looking at it through Lahore's perspective and appraise the significance of its creative energies. Now, in inquiry committee reports and newspaper advertisements of this period, especially the ones that were published and were in circulation in Lahore, such as the Tribune, mentioned several film producing companies that quickly changed hands or went bust in Lahore. While these instances suggest the instability of film enterprise at this time, in no way limited to this city, they also confirm a gentle throb of film production and its ancillary activities. New film journals were being launched in the city until late 1946, while the editor of Lahore's well-established film magazine Cine Herald, B.R. Chopra, was planning to make his first film Lala Rukh in the city. The same year, two studios, Leela Mandir and Shori, both within the city limits, caught fire and caused deliberation in the local press over the increasing presence of studios in Lahore's residential areas. Lahore's transformation from an experimental film center in the late 1930s to a profit-oriented one in the mid-1940s was in particular overseen by two family-based film companies, the Pancholis and the Shoris, who had survived the war years and benefited from the weakening of the studio system in the Indian industry. The entrepreneurial men who became synonymous with the success of their respective production companies were brothers Reva Shankar and Dalsukh Pancholi. And they were Sindhis and were originally based in Karachi. And the other family were the Shoris. So this was a father-son team, Roshan Lal Shori and Rupkishore Shori. Now, the person who was credited in popular film magazines, credited with putting Punjab on the film map of India, was Dalsukh Pancholi. However, it was his brother Reva Shankar Pancholi who entered the business of film exhibition in the late 1920s and acquired the earliest cinema halls in Karachi, the Imperial Cinema and the Picture House. And I came across a letter that was shared by their family where Pancholis were called the cinema kings of Karachi, right? And they had monetary stakes in film exhibition extending as far as Rangoon apparently. In 1933, the brothers moved into film distribution, setting up a company office, the Empire Talkies Distributors in Calcutta, which had exclusive rights in British India for RKO Pictures, Walt Disney Pictures, and RCA Talkie equipment. Later, Hindi and Bengali films were also included in the Empire Talkies distribution net. The Pancholi's territorially expansive commercial interests demanded a highly mobile life, with the traveling case of essential items always kept ready at home for Dalsukh for urgent travel. So this was also shared by the family, that his suitcase was always ready for his urgent travels. Now, with feet firmly planted in film exhibition and distribution, Dalsukh Pancholi ventured into production in the late 1930s. The premises of an optical factory in Lahore were converted into a film studio, and by 1934, the Pancholi Art Pictures was born. And their earliest forays were in Punjabi, starting off with Dasi, Gul Bakauli, and Yamla Jat. Now, and of course, the significance of the Pancholis stems from their vertically integrated approach to film business as exhibitors, distributors, and now producers. And Isabel, if we can go to Pancholis, and this image, if you can just go to the, so this is one, I'll return to this image later on, but just to share this with you, this is a photograph of the Silver Jubilee celebrations, 25 weeks of Khandaan in Indian Cinema Hall. So this was celebrated in Lahore and the record was kept, celebrating earlier successes as well. Yeah, so the Pancholi Film Company successfully carved its space in the All India film enterprise by their iconic association with Punjab, starting off with Punjabi films and from this location proceeding into the All India circuit with Hindi Urdu productions. And Khandaan is the film that I'm going to talk about today. But before Khandaan, there was also Khazanchi, the Treasurer. That was their first Hindi film. And it was a huge success. It was a huge musical success, actually. At this time. Now, what the newspapers also, what one can see if you go through the newspapers at this time, is that the news stories on Pancholi Art Pictures were regularly published. So they reported punctual studio schedules with a 9 to 6 working shift, akin to a well-regulated factory routine. The tantalizing highlights of each of the films were publicized in the weekly film columns of city newspapers, such as the Lathi fight scene in Zamindar, which was another Hindi Urdu film by the Pancholis. So the Lathi fight scene in Zamindar, in which 800 people took part. The attack was very furious, and the director has picturized it in true color and atmosphere, said one report. A new technique of storytelling was the focus in film Punji, where something is happening all the time, said that report. Every gag, every punch, and every purple patch is woven in terms of the tale. So the newspapers also kept up with the studio ongoings. The rise of the freelance system in the early 1940s allowed Lahore studios to bring in stars from Bombay and provided occasions to build up anticipation around the film under production. So the Bombay-based actress Shanta Apte's arrival in Lahore in January 1942 for the shoot of the film Zamindar was widely publicized, including the massive payment she received for it. These production dalliances with Bombay were also susceptible to running into rough waters, as is evident in the Apte Pancholi collaboration saga, with Dalsukh suing the Shanta Apte concern for ₹1,00,000 by mid-1942 for an alleged breach of contract. Similarly, when Dalsukh Pancholi cast Meena Shori in Sheher Se Dur, the studio owner Sohrab Modi, her employer in Bombay, slapped damages on Pancholi. So at this time, the studio system is weakening, but still people are with one or the other studio. Anyway, so in March 1947, unprecedented violence paralyzed Lahore, with all commercial activities, including film production and exhibition, shutting down. While the cinema houses opened again by the end of the month, the choice at hand for cinema goers of Lahore between an RKO radio musical and a 20th century Fox thriller was indicative of the production standstill that the city faced over the next few months. The shooting of the Pancholi film Patthar with Meena Shori was paused and ultimately completed in Bombay in 1948, an instance of evacuee filming practices during this time. The Pancholis had good reasons to wait for the storm to blow over. They now control 2 active studios in the city, having acquired the second unit Pradhan Pictures in 1942. Credited with putting Punjab on the film map of India, it was a matter of months before Dalsukh would ultimately be forced to leave Lahore in late 1947. Among the relocation options briefly considered by the family were Kabul and London, but they ultimately settled for Bombay, where Dalsukh produced 4 films in independent India before his demise in 1959. So this was a quick tour of what was happening with the Pancholis in the 40s and 50s. I will not go into detail about the Shoris today because I want to talk in detail about the film Khandaan. But I just want to make one comment about why Shoris are important in this regard. Apart from the many films that they were making, it's also that the one characteristic style of all Shori films at this time, and also something that they carry over to Bombay, is that humor was central to Shori films. So they managed to capture the jocular spirit of Lahore, and a lot of their films were spoofs, were often sardonic, and that sensibility was something that I would argue was something that the Shoris introduced to Lahore filmmaking. And of course, when they come to Bombay, Roop Shori makes these romantic comedies with Meena as the lead star. So this is something that we just need to know about the Shoris and what was happening in Lahore at this time. So there was a jocular vein of Lahore that was captured by the Shoris. Okay. And the Shoris also acquired studio property in Lahore. By 1947, they were controlling 2 studios in Lahore. And in 46, they managed to get the most recent film equipment that one could find at this time. There were 6 films that were underway in the autumn of 1946. And, of course, the Shoris could not predict that the city would be engulfed by violence just a few months later. So the loss of Lahore's brief revival to partition, I think, needs to be highlighted, not only to dovetail with the challenging origins of the film industry in Pakistan, which is how it's often talked about, but to consider the possibilities the city was poised for in terms of film style and production investment. Based on extant films and traces of plots, arguably a low-on capital Lahore was privileging a parodic relationship with Bombay products, while innovating in terms of narrative and technique, often using facilities situated in Bombay. The Shores in particular infused the jocular spirit of the city in their films, and the itinerant freelancer made possible by a weekend studio system allowed Lahore to briefly enter the All India circuit, largely dominated by Bombay, and to meet capital with reflexive irony. And I'm going to talk about this sort of parodic and ironic relationship in the next section. So if we can go to the clips now, Isabel, thanks. So an all India film from Lahore, which is the last, yes, thank you. So the film that I'm going to talk about today is Khandaan. Perhaps many of you have already seen it, are familiar with it. And we're going to watch 3 sequences from it, but before we start, I'll quickly do a little bit of an introduction. So during the war years, the term All India film was frequently used to signal a national taxonomy for films produced in colonial India. This category was made coherent through the cartographic representation of undivided India, as we've seen in the Pancholi magnifying glass image. And so this category was made coherent through the cartographic representations of undivided India, claiming connection between the on-screen and off-screen demography, and linking film themes, often tenuously, to matters of so-called national importance. Produced just before the strict film licensing of the war years came into effect, Khandaan, Lineage, it was an Urdu film from 1942, was the second All India film of the Punjab-based Pancholi Art Pictures. Now, for a cinephilic South Asian film history, Khandaan is notable for several reasons. One of the rare films from pre-partition Lahore to have survived, it was one of singing star Noor Jahan's earliest successes, starred arch-villain Pran in a rare role as a romantic lead. So Pran, most of you would know, is the baddie of Indian cinema, but in Khandaan, he plays the romantic lead. And it's also among the earliest surviving Muslim socials. Yet, what if faced with the absence of other revelatory material on the relationship between the film cities of Bombay and Lahore, Khandaan might also provide Lahore's cinematic comment on Bombay and its privileged position in the business of cinema. The opening sequence of the film, featuring so-called royal personages in an ornamental garden, strongly invites such a reading. Both the studio film and its publicity gesture towards the relationship between film cities and film genres, revealing the national pressures on film enterprise in the 1940s. So through a reading of the interplay between the on and off-screen images and stories that underlie the film, including the vision and visuals of nation, a historically contextualized approach to the film draws attention to the problem introduced by partition to national film categorization. So in the opening sequence, and the film opens with a song, and the song is Urja Panchi Urja, Fly Away Bird, in which actress Noor Jahan in royal finery enjoins a dove to fly free. The leading man Pran materializes out of an overgrown shrubbery and asks, Kya Noor Jahan ga rahi hai? Is that Noor Jahan singing? In a double allusion to the historical character and the singing star. He then joins in the love duet, confirming that the emerging singing sensation of the 1940s was indeed playing her Mughal namesake, Empress Noor Jahan. Gazing longingly at each other, the two sing not sweet nothings, but lofty ideals. So we can watch the clip now. Thank you.
हाथ में जुल्फे तेरी एक हाथ में पावर एक हाथ में जुल्फे तेरी एक हाथ में पावर मैं बनूं मैं इसका बाबा बनी तेरी है तेरी है ये मतलब
I'm not sure if you could hear it very clearly. I'm sorry. I think it's the transmission that's not very clear. But I can share the lyrics here. So what are they singing? They're singing, मैं प्यार का काबा बनूं, मैं हुस्न का मंदिर, फिर हिंद को हम प्रेम का पैगाम सुनाएं, रूठी हुई प्रजा को हम फिर से मनाएं, इंसान को इंसान से आजाद कराएं. I become the Mecca of love, I the temple of beauty. Then we narrate the message of love to India and persuade our peaked subjects once again to free humans from the clutches of their fellow humans. So this is what the song is saying at this time. Now here, in a moment of direct address within the song, the actors are framed together, articulating the nationalist vision, one that is routinely imagined India as the golden bird in imperial captivity. However, what is available on the screen is not a bird in cage, but a free bird perched on Noor Jahan's hands, unable to flutter until it's literally thrown upwards out of the frame. Thinking along with the film, one could argue that to fly, the bird needs the wings of oneness, as evident in the stress on Hindu-Muslim unity evoked through Kaaba and Mandir. The song ends, and the royal couple take a leisurely stroll through the garden when a sonorous off-screen voice intrudes. A hoary commoner appears to walk towards the lovers, singing at them in response. In a sudden character switch from benevolent rulers to affronted royalty, the queen draws a pistol from her gown and shoots at the passerby. The second clip, please. Fake pistol.
दिनों की महफिल से दूर होया गया हूँ राह में मंजिल से दूर खिलवत में शय के आने की जुर्रत हुई तुझे
है किसके रूबरू यह मालूम भी तुझे
हो ऐसा हुस्न जलवा फिगन जिसके सामने क्या जाने वो गरीब के है किसके सामने शौक ही अगर नहीं मलका से तो क्या है ये
बदबख्त तेरी बेअदबी की सजा है ये दिखाना तो जरा ये पिस्तौल हाय हाय सारा खेल मिट्टी में मिला दिया अरे तुम्हें यहाँ मरकर गिर पड़ना था इस टके के पिस्तौल से जिससे कुत्ते बिल्ली तक मरना बेइज्जती मालूम हो मैं नहीं मरती इस पिस्तौल से तो खेल ही तो रहे हैं खेल में दिखावे की सब चीजें ऐसे ही इस्तेमाल की जाती हैं तो दिखावे की सब चीजें मेरे ही वास्ते रह गई हैं
Thank you. So in a sudden character switch from benevolent rulers to affronted royalty, the queen draws a pistol from her gown and shoots at the passerby. Musically in tone, the mood switches from a historical romance, and I'm using Priya Jayakumar's coinage here, from a historical romance to the mildly comic, and the passerby stands transfixed instead of collapsing. I mean, collapses on the ground, but then rises up again. The royal act is over, and the hoary intruder turns out to be a young girl with a shrill voice who shouts at her co-players, refusing to collapse at the round of a fake pistol. The fake king and the queen laugh, accepting the abrupt end of their Mughal performance. when the young girl calls it an unfair game, where the lovers reserve royal roles for themselves while she is reduced to a passerby with a billy goat beard, the queen placates her by pointing out that they are, after all, just playing. Now, I propose that Khandan's opening is not only self-reflexive, but also a parodic reference to a Bombay film, Pukar, at this time, directed by Sohrab Modi. It's from 1939, released 3 years before Khandaan, and Khandaan in this sequence signals a crucial shift in film genres. Now, Pukar was set in the Mughal past of the region and imagined a world more just than the colonial present. Here, the self-righteous justice of the Mughal Emperor Jahangir is put to severe test when his beloved wife Noor Jahan accidentally kills a washerman. Spoofing in particular the murdering queen of Pukar, Khandan's Noor Jahan wears a crown similar to the one donned by the Pari Chehra, fairy-faced Bombay star Naseem. By foregrounding its small-scale production facilities limited to a 4-minute recreation of the historical romance and its material constraints implicit in imitative crowns, fake firearms, and billy goat beard wigs, Khandaan, through its material poverty, lays bare the subterfuge of an extravagant film genre. So when Khandaan begins, it's, if you haven't seen the film, if it's the first time you're watching it, you think it could be a historical if you don't know that it's actually a social. So it begins like that and then it changes. More suggestive is the parallel drawn with play activities, with an experimental playfulness inherent in filmmaking in Lahore at this time. At the heart of this sequence is also the vexing matter of film reception during these years. The institutions of film criticism and film policy in late colonial India were busy constructing the Indian viewer as a gullible commoner in whom the grand acts and on-screen gestures could produce tangible effects. The girl posing as the poor commoner thus underscored the artifice of this imagined spectator. After a send-up of the historical romance within this sequence, Khandaan reveals the other genre it draws on, the Muslim social, investing it with realism as well as political maturity as opposed to the childlike playfulness of the opening sequence. So it has been argued in the instance of another early 1940s studio film from Bombay, Qismat, and argued by Ravi Vasudevan, that pleasure and meaning in the cinematic experience is strongly self-referential rather than merely referring to the extra-cinematic. Khandan's self-referentiality is not limited to its ironic distance from Bombay, but also elaborates the off-center film entrepreneurship of Lahore, of which it was a product. While Khandaan was independent director Shaukat Hussain Rizvi's directorial debut, its Lahore provenance was strongly emphasized by visual references to Pancholi Art Pictures' previous film, Khazanchi, which was also an all-India success. And there were a number of ways in which both films referenced and implicitly commented on the real-life world of the Lahore film business. For instance, they were both films characterized hotels as a site of, ruse and as a dangerous site. Both films had a troubled relationship with women performers. So when you watch Khandaan, you're constantly reminded of Khazanchi, and it's this kind of studio over that it's hard to forget that this is a Pancholi film. Now, despite these distractions of the local, Khandan's ambitions were, of course, all Indian, as is amply evident in its publicity. It is possible to read this as the anxiety of a Lahore studio regarding its circulation in the face of the technical and material superiority of Bombay. However, as the Pancholis also commanded an extensive distribution and exhibition network, such claims to the national market, which was in a sense the colonial subcontinent, may equally be read as evidence of the Lahore studio's entrepreneurial muscle, joining in the contest for power in the 1940s. The film's Punjab provenance became a crucial highlight of the campaign, where in one instance, the Pancholi lens literally magnified the regional into the national. So there are two images, one of Khazanchi, which is making music for the nation. If you go to the parent slide.
I think I have to return fully.
Yeah, just to the parent, the first slide. Or we can look at it at the end.
In a second. There we go.
Yes, so this one. So as I mentioned earlier, the undivided, the map of undivided India was routinely used in the publicity. So this is an advertisement for Khazanchi, but you can see it's also publicizing Khandaan, right? And as I mentioned earlier, Khazanchi became popular for its music. Most of all, I mean, every time Khazanchi is being publicized, it's publicized in terms of its music. And the other image is, I think we've seen it earlier, but if you want to look at it again, is the magnifying glass one. I'm still fascinated by that image with the magnifying glass that claims that the Punjab grows to a nation's greatness. And the magnifying glass says Khandaan, the Pancholi. And of course, you can just see the Punjab sort of taking as much space as the rest of India there. Okay. Yeah, just wanted. So coming back to the question with which I started this chapter. So what is the significance of an all India film made in Lahore? Arguably, the representational claim involved in an all India film was similar to the contest evolving in the political realm between the All India Muslim League and the Congress. Punjab politics, however, was dominated by the cross-communal unionist party of landlords, which until 1947 championed the political vision of a united Punjab within a decentralized federal India, a tendency that underpins the regional exceptionalism of Khandaan's publicity. Now, this correspondence of cinematic imagination with the political realm thus imagines the film market as an electoral space and an arena onto which the exercise of universal franchise, except a mutated one, could be displaced until its realization in the independent nation state. As a film trade category, All India film signifies an attempt to map the national onto the representational space of the film narratives, a claim which could be evidenced through revenues across a wide but limited territory. In the ongoing aspiration, hardly limited to film narratives and intensely evident in other performative arts, certain themes appear to have gained more all-Indian traction than others. One of these was Hindu-Muslim unity, earning in many instances tax-free status and endorsement by public figures and the nationalist press. The theme appears as an important filmmaking resource in the late 1930s and 40s, realized differently across different genres, and already noted in Khandaan's opening sequence, suggesting that the masquerade of Mughal historicals was outworn in this regard. Khandaan offers within its Muslim social genre an innovative contemporary image of interfaith conviviality. So last one, Ram and Akbar, the
पिताजी बाहर कोई साहब अकबर मिलने के लिए आए, कहते हैं आपके पुराने दोस्त हैं। मेरे पुराने दोस्त अकबर? मुझे तो इस नाम का कोई दोस्त याद नहीं। अच्छा, उन्हें अंदर बुलाओ। अच्छा, अब तुम सबको छुट्टी। सीधा इस बुढ़े को भी लेके जा। आइए, अंदर आ जाइए। मुझसे मिलना है आपको? हाँ हाँ, शायद आपने मुझे पहचाना नहीं। मैं आपका वही पुराना दोस्त अकबर, वो शख्स जिसके कत्ल के मुकदमों में आज से 25 साल पहले आपने वकालत की थी। आप, मैं क्यों कर यकीन करूं? अकबर, और यूं यकायक मुझे तो ख्याल तक न रहा था कि आपकी सजा की मुद्दत खत्म हो चुकी है। सजा के चंद साल अभी बाकी थे, लेकिन मेरा रिकॉर्ड अच्छा था। ताजपोशी की खुशी में जिन कैदियों को छोड़ा गया उनमें मुझे भी चुन लिया। तो तशरीफ रखिए। बेटा रतन, पहले आपके लिए कपड़ों का इंतजाम करो। अच्छा पिताजी।
Salma, you're muted.
Yeah. Khandaan offers within its Muslim social genre an innovative contemporary image of interfaith conviviality. Akbar, who has been serving a life term for murder, is amongst the prisoners pardoned on the occasion of the king's coronation. He goes to his old friend and lawyer, Ram Shukla's house, to ask after his only son, who has left the city. Reunited after decades, Akbar and Ram, names pregnant with political significance, embrace spiritedly in a tableau containing a sacred Hindu image in the center background. I don't know if it was clear, but it's right in the center when the two of them get together. As a source of comfort for Ram, allaying anxieties of ritual pollution and a reminder of Akbar's difference, the space of the cross-communal embrace is sacred and not secular. As someone outside the principal line of descent, which constitutes the core dilemma of the film, Ram expedites the damaged father-son relationship into a recuperative trajectory. It is a delicate balancing act between knowledge and its withholding, orchestrated by the family well-wisher Ram, which reinforces the customary It is a delicate balancing act between knowledge and its withholding, orchestrated by the family well-wisher Ram, which reinforces the customary order through which matters of ancestry can be come to terms with. The strong mediating role of a Hindu character in a genre that otherwise works out the aspirations of Muslim independence is constituted in this film from the Muslim majority province where the Unionist party's United Punjab held sway. Made at a time of increased yet uneasy collaboration between the Unionist Party and the Muslim League, Khandaan remains singular in representing a convivial, multicultural social order where the Punjab indeed grew to a nation's greatness, no less by offering federalism as a national template, one that combined the accommodation of an unmarked social film. So Khandaan is never at this time publicized as a Muslim social. It's a retrospective tag. One that combined the accommodation of an unmarked social film with the particularity of Muslim representation. Such a sensibility and ethos are missing from the Muslim social genre films produced in pre-partition Bombay, in post-partition India, and in the Urdu films in Pakistan after independence. So this is something that I haven't come across this sensibility in rest of the Muslim socials or the Urdu film in Pakistan. Khandaan proved to be a commercial success across film territories in undivided India, and as I shared earlier, the surviving photograph of its Silver Jubilee celebrations. So I will conclude this examination of Khandaan by returning to its significance. With the strong presence of the nation within its trade and thematic horizons, Khandaan poses the delicious problem of categorization. While it shares the concerns and motifs of Muslim socials of the 1940s and therefore participates in the film genre, its publicity as the All India film significantly denies any particularity. As a self-professed All India film, it certainly cannot be termed pre-national unless we decidedly privilege nations that came to be over the ones that were imagined. Yet made in pre-partition Lahore, it is neither Indian nor Pakistani. The production team was also, and above the line production team, was also equally divided after partition. Studio owner and producer Dalsukh Pancholi, actor Pran and actress Manorma moved to India, while director Shaukat Hussain Rizvi, actress Noor Jahan, music director Ghulam Haider, and writer Imtiaz Ali Taj opted for Pakistan. Paralleling the extra cinematic experience, the film could offer a preliminary insight into the gains and the losses of the division. The gains are the national cinemas of the subcontinent, while the loss is the All India Film Enterprise as a territorial market and a provincially differentiated resource. By resources here, I mean the available templates of communal coexistence and entrepreneurial ease of the United Punjab province, one that was represented and secured by the ascendancy of the cross-communal Unionist Party until 1947. Beyond everything, as an all-India film of Lahore, Pancholi's Khandaan is a cultural testament to a nation as both powerful and incomprehensible in a partition that was already under progress. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Salma. That was wonderful. I would love to open it up for questions. If you would mind raising your hand and letting me know. If not, I'm happy to take the first question if there's no hands up. People are thinking. So I very much enjoyed it, Salma, and having read the chapters, there's something that stood out now that we had the PowerPoint presentation and I could focus on the images that you have, which is the contrast in the image that you have for Khazanchi and then for I believe it's the Shori films with the magnifying glass. And I almost see it as the visual versus the oral, right? Sort of the seeing, the hearing it and the focusing and seeing. And then I thought, well, could you speak a little bit more about the role of specifically, given that these two films, right, were so important for their music. So can you talk a little bit more about the specific role of the music in creating the All India Lahore film? And then maybe Noor Jahan's own role in doing that as a Punjabi woman, as a woman, not from Lahore specifically, but with a large connection to it in creating that.
Thank you for the question. So as I mentioned, more than Khandaan, it was Khazanchi that was publicized and celebrated for its music. And in fact, in Film India, all the advertisements are around the songs from Khazanchi. So every time there's an advert, it's along, it's talking about one or the other song from Khazanchi. If one looks at these memoirs, for instance, Balraj Sahni's memoir talks about the music of Khazanchi in details. So they say that it combined, this is Ghulam Haider, of course, so that it combined a folk music with certain Western influences, right? And the music became popular, especially because the soldiers who were, the Indian soldiers that were serving in the colonial army started sending in requests for these songs through radio, right? So at this time, Balraj Sahni is working for BBC, and he says we were very embarrassed by these songs, Khazanchi's songs, because they were a mixture of Indian tunes, folk tunes, and Western tunes, and our British colleagues made fun of us. But that's what the soldiers wanted to listen to, so they kept sending these requests. He calls it a trendsetter in terms of music, Khazanchi, not so much about Khandaan, but Khazanchi's music especially. And so there's of course the kind of the musical side to it, but then there was also Shaukat Hussain Rizvi, who directed Khandaan, was an editor in Khazanchi, and he sort of recounts in his memoir that how Pancholi called him and said, I want someone to edit this song, Sawan Ke Nazare Hain. And, we want to shoot this with girls on, riding on bicycles, but it's very difficult to shoot, moving people. So we want someone to edit a moving background. And, then Shaukat Hussain Rizvi says, oh, well, who else could have done it but me? So he kind of describes this person. So well, both visually and in terms of music, Khazanchi and its songs are kind of pretty important. As far as Noor Jahan, well, Noor Jahan, correct me, I mean, there are people who know more about this than me, but Noor Jahan made her mark with Punjabi films before this, right? So she was also a stage performer, and I think one of the sources mentioned that she came from Mughaniya family, family of singers, performers. And she was doing stage performances as Baby Noor Jahan Party. So Baby Noor Jahan Party becomes popular in the area around Lahore, and that's when she is sort of scouted by Pancholi. So she becomes, of course, she starts off by singing in Punjabi and then comes to as far as I remember, she's not singing. I mean, she's not part of Khazanchi. So in Khandaan, she starts, of course, singing. But by then, she had, of course, built an image and popularity as a singer of Punjabi songs in Pancholi films. I'm trying to think, maybe Yamla Jatt. But yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, there's.
I think Devashri's hand.
Hi, so nice to see you, Salma, and to get a glimpse of what promises to be a fantastic book, right with insights on both, I think, production histories that we still need to kind of recover. And I thought a very, very inventive kind of reading of this weird play with genre in this kind of film within a film, play within a film kind of a mode that I think is doing all this very interesting kind of commentary about the different industries. I just had two quick questions. One, because I've been very interested in this myself. Even while I think these Lahore film companies are aspiring towards a kind of an all-India commercial, territorial distribution kind of possibilities, along with these sensibilities, right, that you're mentioning, there seems to be a counter kind of an impulse, and this is not just Babura Patel's kind of turn to rabid Islamophobia, but a way in which different film journalists from Calcutta, Bombay, and Lahore are trying to categorize the regional specificities of these different industries. So, for example, I've seen not just the film journalists, but also producers who are trying to woo theater owners, saying that this is what a Punjab audience looks like. So a Punjab audience is an audience that is more fond, in the readings that I have done, are more fond of music. So there's a way in which, and then the Calcutta audience is very interested in story, and hence all these adaptations from literature is a Calcutta niche. And Bombay is some kind of mishmash of all of these things. So do you get a sense that musicality is being kind of marked out as something that is a regionally specific attraction? That was one question. And I think, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Just wanted to hear about this musicality question.
Well, to be honest, that's really not my impression. My impression was that, that at least, I mean, again, I'm going by Film India and the Lahore newspapers, right? And they're mostly English language newspapers. But the sense that I'm getting is that it has infused a Punjabi spirit into the music. It's not that music was something that, I mean, only Punjabi audiences like music, but that the Punjabi music itself has made producers in Bombay excited about it, excited about, getting Ghulam Haider to come and compose in Bombay. So that's the sense that I got. More than musicality, actually, it was this sense of irreverence or, lightheartedness. That seems to be more of the Lahore brand at this time, which is, but not just, it's not just about film reception or film representation, but also that while people who are living in Lahore are looking forward to film shoots, that now, suddenly Dalsukh Pancholi is shooting with the Olympic champion Janki Das on this highway. And so many people have gathered to watch it. So there is this, or the fact that suddenly someone goes to Talent Scout and Hira Mandi and spots Pran there and says, ki chalo, aa jao, I'll do your makeup. So there's this ease, there's this jocular spirit. This is a sense I get from Lahore, and that a lot of, at least the Punjabi audiences, went to watch the shooting and then went to watch what they had seen while it was being shot. That's the sense that there's this enthusiasm around filmmaking within the city, more than the music, really. But what you're saying also, I mean, I see that point as well. I mean, it could be these provincially differentiated sensibilities, which then somehow comes together in Bombay, as a compendium, as it's been said, a compendium of regional forms. Yeah.
I mean, these are obviously artificial frames that different critics are applying to try to make sense of what makes a commercial film. But there's also something in what you're describing about a Lahore modernity, which is part of that excitement, right? Pran, who's working, I think, in a photo studio at some point, and is very well known amongst the locals because he wears the best suits, the most well-tailored outfits. So there's something else going on in the texture of these different cities and what they kind of allow. But thank you.
Thank you.
Isabel, are you saying something, or are you're muted?
Any further questions? I see one here. I think
Yeah,
it's Valerie. Yeah.
I can't see the questions for some reason, but I think I put my hand up.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, I must not have put my hand up because I don't see it on my screen either. So I did something wrong. But anyway, thank you for this really sort of fascinating, for somebody who does, is not an expert in these films and have actually seen remarkably few of them, given how long I've been involved in all of this. I really enjoyed some of the distinctions you were making. A couple of things I was curious about that sort of came up in passing, or thinking of other stereotypes I have. You mentioned that the Pancholis were Karachi based, and then got involved in the Punjabi film industry and started out with films, the very first films in Punjabi, and then moved into Lahore, but with an all India, an eye to an all India ambition. So I'm wondering why given that they're based in Karachi in the first place, why they started out with Punjabi. And then the other question was, this irreverence, or this characteristic, the way you're characterizing Punjabi films, or maybe you're characterizing the Urdu based broader films, but the stereotype of Punjabi films is they tend to be more violent than they as a regional film industry. So I'm just curious about, is there a transition to that, or again, we're talking about, to some extent, the framing that's put on these industries.
Yeah, thank you. But I was also thinking about this as to, I mean, one obvious reason as to why Pancholis, I mean, even though they were based in Karachi and the Sindhis, they decide to open a studio in Lahore is because, well, Karachi, I mean, if you think about it, Karachi at this time is very close to Bombay, right? And I feel it's also at this, I mean, Bombay had some studios, some experimental filmmaking going on already in the 30s and also 1920s. But 30s is when they have this group of filmmakers called the Bhatti Gate. filmmakers. And so there's some film activity, some potential for an audience, Punjabi audience. And I think this is my guess really, that one reason was that because there was already some production, some studio spaces existing in Lahore, that's why the Pancholis decided to open a studio there. The fact that the Punjabi film market was untapped, and regionally had a sizable market in terms of Urdu Punjabi being there. So that, as opposed to, let's say, Sindhi film. And also geographically, I feel Karachi is quite close to Bombay. So it might have helped, but in terms of when you're thinking of regionally differentiated areas, it's not so away from Bombay at this time. The other question about Punjabi films being, so the Punjabi films that are available, or whatever synopses I've come across from the 1930s, I mean, a lot of them are based on the Qissa Dastan or the folk tales of the region. So the violence of Punjabi cinema, which one associates, let's say from the 1970s and 80s, especially, that are being made in Lahore, I mean, this is not the sense I get from the synopsis from 1930s, or even the titles from 1930s and 40s, right? A lot of this is the folk tales, or the violence is there, which is part of the folk tale violence. So it's not there as a cinematic highlight or a pleasure that it becomes later on. Pleasure for some, not for everyone, but definitely an attraction. Yeah, so in terms of, and in another article that I looked more in detail on Punjabi films in the 50s that are coming out from Lahore. A lot of these are very rustic films. So these are films that are based on sort of agrarian relations. Even the Qissa Dastan are very agrarian in that sense. The imagination is very different from what one might have of Urdu. Qissa Dastan is very sort of feudal in that sense. So that's there from the 1950s really. But at this time, when the Pancholi, the impression that I have is mostly folk tales and or remakes of films that are already successful in other film centers. So if a film has done well in Calcutta, in Bombay, so there will be a Punjabi remake of that, simply because it has worked well in the box office. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Salma. So we have a question in the chat, and then David. So then Salma Sood asked, how does Lahore's films extract comedy out of the traumatic expression, out of traumatic partition events? Are there any examples?
Sorry, I can't see the question.
I'm happy to read it. How do Lahore films extract comedy out of traumatic partition events, and are there any examples?
Lahore films? That's a good question. What I can talk about is a Lahore filmmaker extracting, who made films in Bombay after moving from Lahore to Bombay, and his practice in Bombay. So what he does is Roop Shori and Meena Shori, right? Roop Shori is a refugee filmmaker who comes from Lahore to Bombay. And what they do is, in their earlier films, what they do is that the confusion and chaos that is caused by partition is turned into an occasion for humor. Every little bit. For instance, there is no place for you to stay, you've lost. So that becomes an occasion for humor, right? Or the fact that there are demographic changes. So there is a joke on homelessness, not just homelessness, but the lack of servants, or the lack of trust, people who you could trust, or even the loss of property, right? So all this, the so-called ingredients of partition, right, are turned into these occasions of humor. So, but these are films made in Bombay by the refugee filmmaker Roop Shori. I'm thinking in Lahore, what happens?
But you argue, right, that they're also very much Punjabi-centric films, even if they're made in Bombay?
Yes, of course. Yeah. I mean, when you watch a Shori film, you know these are Punjabi actors with their accents, with the way they are dressing. So even though it's never mentioned as to where they're staying, their towns are not mentioned, but you know that these are Punjabi because of the way they are dressed, the way they're talking, the song lyrics, the percussive hand tapping in one of the songs. So there are all these hints that are there. It's kind of obvious that these are all Punjabi. But I mean, I wouldn't call them Lahori. I mean, they're Lahori films in the sense that if you see a continuity in terms of a Lahori filmmaker making films in Bombay, yeah. But in terms of, I'm trying to think of films that are made in Lahore after partition. I'm trying to think of comedies there. It's kind of hard to really think of anything. I mean, the first film that directly confronts the trauma of partition is not a comedy, really. It's Kartar Singh, which is in Punjabi, and it's a very serious film. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. David Leleville?
We can't hear you, David.
The microphone is off. It's still off. It's still off. There we go.
Now I go. I was saying thank you, Salma, for your presentation, and I look forward to the book. You've sort of anticipated what I was going to ask, which is the other part of it, the all India aspirations of this cinema from Lahore. And one of the things that is often said about certainly the early cinema is that it attempted to be neutral and all India and to reach out to the widest possible audience by not being regionally specific. And obviously that's not the case in Punjabi films, but in the Hindi, Urdu, Hindustani films, there is an attempt to find some sort of wider way of bridging audiences by not being regionally specific. One way was to be Mughal and to make, to emphasize the Mughals, usually with a Rajput or characters and so on. But that's not always the case. And the other is to mark the film as Muslim, and that gets into what is a Muslim social and the Mughal costume drama versus the more contemporary Muslim film. So I wonder how that works out with the films from Lahore, comparing them perhaps, as you mentioned, to Bukhar on the one hand, and say Mehboob's Elan, which is all Muslim, except that the actors are not Muslims, or many of them are.
Yes. Thank you, David, for being there and for your question. So I must sort of say that a lot of films from Lahore do not survive, and a lot of my research is therefore based on the synopsis or the song booklets that are there. But my impression, I mean, one thing is that the kind of historicals that Bombay was producing, like Pukar or Humayun or Mughal-e-Azam was supposed to be made in 46 and then took 14 years to make. But it's constantly being discussed in film magazines. So from late 1930s to 40s, I mean, historicals are constantly present, at least in Bombay. That's not the case in Lahore. And I mean, partly I think one reason is that the historicals need a lot of money, capital to be made. And of course, they have to be very kind of star-centered. I mean, in order to work, you need to have a strong star to carry the road through. So it's and most of the films from Lahore, as far as synopses are concerned, or even the surviving films, you can see that they're not historical romances. Most of them are either based on folk tales, so not about rulers, but more about people living under rulers, or the Leila Majnu or Sassi Punhu, or that sort of a thing, or like Khazanchi or Khandaan, they're about the contemporary moment, yeah, and most of them are sort of very modern, men and women going on cycling trips together. So there's also as Debashi mentioned, that kind of Lahore modernity that is being reflected in them. And I think what to sort of answer your question, I think you're right when you say that these were all sort of strategies or treatments to make the film attract more audiences. So you call it Muslim, or you call it all Indian, or you call it historical. But at the same time, I do see a spirit of experimentation in Lahore, and it's not just at the level of narratives, really. It's also at the level of technique. It's also at the level of involving non-film celebrities within the film narrative. So, so the idea is to reach out to the maximum audience, but you find new ways to do it. So either you get in the Olympic champion to feature in your film, Janki Das, or you have, for instance, Noorjahan is very much part of the kind of singing sensation that's way. But at the level, there is, or the fact that you're filming an underwater scene, so there's also that technique there. So a lot of times that's highlighted. So the highlight of Punji, for instance, in Lahore, was that this is the first film, I don't know if they claimed it to be the first film in India, but it's the first film with an underwater cinematography. So the highlights, to get a wider audience, there are all kinds of highlights that are being advertised. So underwater cinematography, or 800 men participating in a fight. Yeah, and so you go and just watch 800 men in a lathi fight. And I think that's what's interesting about Lahore, is that, of course, there's narrative and there are stars that are there, but then there is also this experimentation at the level of techniques and plots and different celebrities that will make a film more successful.
So we have a question by Karuna Vikram, and I'll read it out. I was curious to know more about the difficulties of writing the histories of Pakistani and Indian cinema together. What was the process of reframing this moment as a contingent one, and what was there a future imagined for these two nations and their relationship with each other?
Okay, that's a really big question. I will answer the first one. The last, I don't have an answer to the last question, to be honest. Karuna, so one didn't set out to write the histories together. That's a very ambitious task, right? So this is not something that I'd set out to do. What I'd set out to do was to understand the impact of partition on filmmaking, and that it was very clear that you couldn't do that simply by looking at what was happening in Bombay, or simply looking at what's happening in Lahore, right? So the moment I came across active filmmakers, active actors in the 1940s, I think the difficulty of the task sort of reduced, right? So what I did was I held on to, let's say, 5 or 6 key characters of my research, and I followed them from, let's say, the time they began their careers to the time they ended theirs. And so I was holding on to migrant artists, whether they were moving from Bombay to Lahore or from Lahore to Bombay. Of course, it's impossible to sort of focus on everyone, so I had to choose, and I basically chose where I could get as much details as one could at the time I was doing the research. So, and when I did that, when one focused on migrant artists, then it became very clear that you cannot write the history of one cinema alone. You have to start talking about it together, otherwise it doesn't make any sense. So in terms of practical difficulties, I mean, it's kind of obvious visa regimes between the two countries. Of course, that's one difficulty. How do you access the different spaces? The other thing is a question of language as well. And I think I must confess, so I only look at the Western side, right? So I'm only looking at Punjab. Someone needs to do the Bengal side. And I cannot do that because I just don't know Bengali, right? So language is a difficulty, right? So what else? I think this is not an excuse, but one wishes that the archives were in a better state. And, but then there's no end to it. You have to work with whatever you have. So yeah, basically, these are the challenges, of course. And what's the process of reframing this moment? I don't think I have reframed it as contingent. It has been called contingent for a very long time now. Yeah. In fact, I'm saying that one needs to move beyond the idea of contingency, and one has to look at the constant refashioning and sometimes even very calculated decisions being made by artists at this time.
Well, thank you very much, Salma. I want to say that one of the things that is really a pleasure about your book and reading them is the ways in which you particularly talk about the creative energy in moments of difficulty. And discuss, for example, in the Mina Shodei films and the creative energy behind it, which is a very different approach, I think, to partition that we have seen. But I think that that's a good note to end today's talk, and to wish everybody a good Friday. And thank you very much for being here with us and for presenting your work.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Salma.